We have massive breaking news in the world of combat sports. Francis Ngannou gets the boxing match that he has been pursuing. He said was going to happen, and here we are, a fight with Tyson Fury, October 28th in Saudi Arabia, just announced a few short hours ago here in Nolan. Man, this is crazy. Francis said he would get it. Still a little bit of unclarity right now, but things we do know, it's going to be a 10-round boxing match, contested under professional rules, which means the rumors of an exhibition fight with no knockdowns that Eddie Hearn kind of put out there seemingly aren't true. One thing that's kind of unclear, like, is it going to count towards their professional records and all that stuff? But from the reporting out there from the likes of Mike Coppinger, Ariel Helwani, a press release coming out saying that this is going to be under standard boxing rules. So I think for fans, that's, a pretty pleasant sight to hear. I just want to hear, Nolan, your initial reaction to this news this morning.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I mean, we talked about it. It seemed like a bit of a pipe dream just to kind of see the evolution of this thing come to fruition. It's really exciting. I mean, it's great for Francis. I think everybody can kind of agree now that he went out and he played his cards right. I mean, there was a period of uncertainty there where we were talking about, would he kind of have shot himself in the foot? Would he not? He goes to boxing and then he can't get this bag, or he fights somebody else that's a high level boxer, which beats him or something, and he makes a little bit of money, but the long-term longevity of that thing wouldn't be really worth it. But this is obviously the big Super Bowl for him. He checked off both things on his list. He probably got paid a fat bag from PFL, as we know that he did. And also, now he's got the Tyson Fury fight. And like you said, as a fan, I think the big hurdle or the selling point here, if they did something that was exhibition-y, but it wasn't actual boxing, I think that would have been a problem. Not necessarily for Francis, he probably would have made a lot of money regardless, but for the fans, I think it's a little bit easier to ignore that it is or isn't going to go on a pro record, but that it's a real boxing match, that they're going to have knockdowns, that somebody can get knocked out. So when everybody watches that, sure, the record almost becomes kind of a semantic, right? Like, we saw this fight, it was a real fight, and this was the result, even though it's not on the records, versus them doing things that twist the rules or make you question the legitimacy of the fight itself, or what would have happened if they actually fought. So we'll see what happens with the pro versus exhibition thing. I think, like you said, kind of the wording was weird, which makes you kind of lean towards thinking it's exhibition when they say, it's under professional rules bout. Well, why don't you say it is a professional bout, right? So we'll see what happens, but good for Francis. I guess it's fun for Fury to do something a little bit different, and I think that the fans will dig it as well.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's kind of being put out there that it's unknown what the status of maybe Tyson Fury's belts are or anything like that, but he does not have any mandatories right now, which I guess would open the door for something like this if it was a professional fight, obviously happening in Saudi Arabia, where they're not necessarily under the guise of an athletic commission or anything, and can pretty much do whatever the hell they want. So we'll see ultimately how this unfolds right now. But yeah, it says in kind of the release here, an agreement has been reached with Queensberry, Top Rank, and Ngannou's promotional banner, Gimmick Fight Promotions, capital G, capital I, capital M, capital I, capital K. That seems like a little bit of a shot at maybe Dana White there, right? Like calling the gimmick fights. What did you think of that little wrinkle in that press release?
Yeah, I mean, Francis, it's kind of funny, right? Because I don't think he necessarily leads the battle of the trash talk between him and Dana, but I also think he's had his solid, like, kind of, side shots when you kind of least expect it. So yeah, it was funny. I got a kick out of it. And you mentioned Saudi Arabia too. Something else I saw from some of the more expert boxing people versus like us, who kind of, we get boxing, we know kind of how it works, but we're not as glued to it as they were saying. A lot of times with the Saudi Arabia fights, there's a big guaranteed purse versus any sort of, there's a big guaranteed payout, I should say, versus any sort of incentives. So they were thinking that Francis may have captured a bigger bag than if it had taken place elsewhere, which makes sense. I mean, I'm sure the government over there, is throwing some dough into having this fight there as well. So yeah, man, it's fun times in combat sports. There's never a dull moment. I think you just look at the last week that we've had with UFC 290, then the announcement of Jones versus Stipe, and now this. The storylines just keep rolling, and yeah, I'm excited. This is we're all part of the circus, and this is going to be a fun time, I think.
Yeah, and we'll get into what you said secondly there, Jones and Stipe. The timing of this, is kind of interesting, happening a couple weeks before that fight. What do you think? Like, is this going to is it perfect that they're going to have, these two fights just 2 weeks apart? Is it going to create some like divisiveness? Does one fight take away from the other? I think it's great that these guys are going first with Ngannou and Fury. I think that's definitely very helpful as opposed to if they were like the weekend after or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think they can coexist. I think that's what the big learning lesson here in general is like there's a lot of opportunities that can happen in MMA, right? You don't have to be glued to a certain promotion or whatever. I mean, sure, I think you do mix and match of all these people. I think us in the MMA community, we would have wanted to see the MMA fight between John and Francis. But at the same time, I think we're getting two pretty big fights out of this. You know, spotlighted in the boxing fight. I think people will just attract a lot of interest. I mean, I'm sure boxing people are probably annoyed that they're not getting their version of Francis versus John and Fury versus Usyk. But at the same time, I think if you look at the widespread audience, kind of spreading the wealth here and having two fights that are interesting for very different reasons is great. I mean, I certainly can't complain. I'm sure our website will have more coverage on two different events and more people interested. We'll see it. So I'm excited for it, man. I think it's a fun time, and I really don't think that they do anything to knock each other. I think if anything, it kind of boosts it up, right? Like
Yeah.
we'll see what happens to Francis, and then we'll be able to ask John about it right afterwards. It's actually works out pretty well like that.
So I think this is the interesting question and probably what people who watch this video will want to hear about the most. Like, it's great for Francis, right? He won. I think that's undeniable at this point, getting this fight and the PFL deal. Like, he took a massive risk on himself and going out there and has now completed the mission of what he wanted. But for people like us, we're like, this is great for Francis, saying what I just said. He's going to get his money. But should we actually care about this fight? Like, in theory, Francis, this should not be very competitive, right? Like, Tyson Fury should dominate Francis. So like that's kind of the thing I'm seeing a lot on like Twitter and stuff. And the response is being like, great for Francis, but like, why would I pay money for a non-competitive fight? So what do we make of that? Like, trying to actually the fight itself, separating that from being happy for Francis.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm sure that there are probably more folks in the boxing community that see it for what it is than the MMA community. Like, there's just a lot of people that are MMA fans. They don't necessarily watch boxing. They're going to tune into this because Francis is going to try to fight the heavyweight champion of the world. Very similar to McGregor Mayweather, right? Like, I think there was I mean, when that fight got announced, when McGregor Mayweather got announced, it was a very similar sentiment. Floyd is going to kill him. It's not going to be competitive. But I think over time, as it got bigger and more people talked about it, and there were people that were coming in that were interested that had never watched really much UFC or boxing but wanted to see this fight, I think the public conversation kind of twisted to make it seem like, well, what if? Well, what if he did? What if he lands it? What if he lands a shot? What if, imagine if he did that, if he jumped over to boxing? So, I mean, you're going to always have that element of the what ifs and the people that are kind of outside the combat sports bubble that maybe make it seem like more of a reality that it can even be. But honestly, I think it's kind of such a unique thing that within itself, it's a bit, and this sounds like I'm saying it's a sideshow. I'm not, but it's a spectacle. So sure, you lose some people that fall off the bandwagon because of the fact that it's probably not going to be competitive. But I think you gain more that just want to see this event for what it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, yeah, this is obviously still fresh. We're going to hear more. Obviously, Francis is excited. He's, promising a knockout, as is Tyson. We would expect nothing less. But anything else, Nolan, you think we need to touch on in this kind of initial reaction?
No, man, I think it's just kind of like Luke Thomas, I think, had a pretty good tweet today too about just kind of what this means for the sport and what it goes to show you what when the UFC's the lawsuits against the UFC, how they ended up putting a sunset clause in and what that kind of meant for the sport. But I honestly think this is a bit of a monumental thing. I think it shows that, sure, maybe Francis is a rare case, but I think it maybe will be in the back of minds of other athletes as we move forward, as if they hit that period of free agency, kind of not being afraid to venture out. Granted, I still think most of them will not have that sort of epiphany. I think it's one man can't kind of change the culture, but it's certainly something that's never been done before, which is always impressive. I think when we have conversations and somebody has kind of blazed a trail, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the word used there, monumental, is significant because, man, like, say whatever you want about Francis at this point. Like, he did take a huge risk on himself. There's not many opportunities like this. So, for other fighters who are looking around, like, and maybe want to follow this similar path, it's not always going to be there for you, right? Like, he was positioned well to get this. And it took a while. People were jumping down his throat. All the people out there saying he fumbled the bag. He should run back to the UFC with his tail between his legs. I mean, I think even if he goes out there and gets starched in 30 seconds, like he's proven himself right. The fact that he gets to realize this boxing dream he's had when, he left Cameroon and did all these things, his story that we know so well. So definitely a big congrats to Francis and his manager Markel Martin and all those people involved with getting this fight done. Pretty big time stuff. And yeah, I guess we'll see what happens over the next few months here. But yeah, significant stuff. So appreciate you joining me, Nolan, to talk about this a little bit. And I'm sure follow MMAJunkie.com. We'll have all sorts of stuff related to this. There's other people's reactions, Francis' reaction, Tyson's reaction. It's going to go on here. Here we go. This is going to be a big half of the year for combat sports. And we'll have everyone covered on MMAJunkie.com.